Welcome to the debate. The most dangerous psychological predator you will ever meet, well, they won't come at you with arrogance or aggression, they won't shout you down, and they won't demand your submission. Instead, they will come to you bleeding, asking for your pity.
Yeah, it is a terrifying reality to wake up to. You think you're saving someone. You believe you are nurturing a wounded bird, but you're actually being systematically dismantled from the inside out.
Exactly. Today, we are decoding the hidden, really highly dangerous world of covert narcissism. We're drawing directly from clinical psychology, behavioral profiling, and trauma research to understand a dynamic that is quietly destroying people in their own homes and workplaces.
Right.
My perspective as a behavioral profiler is that covert narcissism is a highly calculated, predatory manifestation of the dark triad, that overlap of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These individuals are sophisticated social hackers.
Mm.
They use weaponized pity and virtuous victim signaling as a systematic method to extract resources, gain power, and, most importantly, secure absolute moral immunity.
And as a trauma-informed therapist, I have to respectfully push back on where we place the magnifying glass here. I mean, if we only look at their calculation, we miss the devastation. My perspective is that the defining feature of covert narcissism isn't just the cold mechanics of the manipulation, it's the insidious psychological cage it builds around the target.
The cage.
Yes, they weaponize the victim's own empathy to completely dismantle their reality. The true measure of this pathology is what it does to the nervous system and really the very identity of the person on the receiving end.
Well, to understand those mechanics, we have to look at the data on what researchers are now calling the dark empath. For decades, traditional psychology taught us a very simple rule: dark personalities lack empathy entirely.
Right, that was the standard model.
Exactly. If you were a narcissist or a psychopath, you just couldn't understand human emotion. But recent behavioral data, where researchers group people based on hidden personality patterns, shows us something much more dangerous. There's a large subgroup that possesses intact, sometimes even superior, cognitive empathy.
Meaning they know exactly what you are feeling?
Right. Cognitive empathy is just data processing. They can read the room. They know you're sad, they know you're anxious. What they lack is affective empathy, meaning they do not actually care that you are hurting.
Wow.
In fact, clinical literature points to a phenomenon called affective dissonance. They can feel satisfaction, even a sense of power or pleasure from your distress, all while perfectly understanding the nuance of your emotions. Because a covert narcissist masks their grandiosity behind what we call the pity play, they operate entirely under the radar.
Which makes them so hard to spot.
It does. Because it's not an emotional reaction for them, it's an algorithm. They are systematically mining the victim for resources while projecting an image of total fragility.
I hear the biology and the profiling argument, but by focusing so heavily on their internal cognitive mechanics, I feel like we lose sight of the weapon itself. I come at it from a different way.
How so?
The focus really must be on the specific emotional toll this inflicts on the target, which I look at through the framework of FOG, fear, obligation, and guilt. Covert narcissists don't just cast a wide net. They are highly specific. They target highly empathic, conscientious people. They exploit the victim's natural fawn response.
Oh, the trauma response where you try to appease a threat by pleasing it.
Right, it's an evolutionary survival mechanism. If a tiger is in the room, you fight or run. But if the threat is your own partner, well, sometimes the nervous system decides the safest route is to nurture the threat, to keep it calm.
That makes sense physiologically.
It does. The true danger here isn't just that the narcissist is calculating. It's that they force the victim into a state of learned helplessness. The victim spends their life living in a psychological minefield where the map changes every single day. They are constantly scanning the environment to prevent the next invisible crisis, which effectively erodes their entire sense of self. They literally forget who they are outside of managing this person's moods.
But if they are trapped in this fog, how do we explain the deliberate, highly orchestrated way the dynamic actually begins? Because from a profiling standpoint, this doesn't happen by accident.
You mean the initial stages of the relationship?
Exactly. It starts with a tactic known as fast vulnerability combined with mirroring. I argue this is purely a data collection phase. Within the first 2 or 3 interactions, the covert narcissist will share a deeply painful story.
Always playing the victim.
Right. It's usually about their abusive ex, a terrible childhood injustice, or how they were profoundly betrayed by a business partner. At the same time, they mirror your values, your wounds, and your dreams. It feels like instant alignment. But structurally, think about how a Trojan horse works.
Okay.
Your psychological firewall is designed to block malicious intruders. So the predator doesn't try to smash through. They disguise themselves as an essential system update. They bypass your defenses by pretending they are vulnerable and need your protection. They are just mapping your vulnerabilities so they can exploit them later.
Wait, look at how they use pity right in that exact moment. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's purely a cold data-gathering algorithm.
You don't think it's calculated?
Let me tell you why. That tactic works precisely because it fundamentally hijacks the victim's biology. When someone comes to you bleeding, metaphorically speaking, it triggers the compassion trap.
The compassion trap?
Yes, it is a physiological response. When you see someone in deep emotional pain and you are an empathic person, your brain releases oxytocin and dopamine. You feel an immense biological responsibility for this person's healing.
So it's a chemical bonding process?
Exactly. The victim isn't just handing over data. Their entire nervous system is being rewired to bond with this person's trauma. The victim gives them the benefit of the doubt, confusing this highly manipulative mirroring with genuine soulmate chemistry. It isn't just a computer virus. It's a physiological hijacking of the victim's innate drive to connect, heal, and protect.
Well, that is a compelling distinction. The biological response of the victim is certainly real, and I don't discount the oxytocin dump. But the predator's deliberate application of that trigger is what defines the abuse for me.
I see what you're saying.
Once they have you hooked, once that compassion trap is set, they shift gears. They move to maintaining control through a mechanism researchers identify as empathetic dominance.
Empathetic dominance. It is a chilling phrase, and it perfectly describes what I see in my practice every single day.
It is remarkably effective because it is so counterintuitive. We're trained to spot overt narcissists, the ones who use physical, financial, or institutional power to dominate a room.
Right, the loud ones.
They suck up all the oxygen by bragging. Covert narcissists claim absolute authority through fragility. In behavioral assessments, they score incredibly high on the Tendency for Interpersonal Victimhood scale, or the TIV. This means they require constant, chronic recognition of their suffering to maintain a one-up position.
Which is exhausting for the partner.
Beyond exhausting. Let me give you an example. The moment you bring up a legitimate grievance, maybe they forgot to pay a major bill, they instantly introduce a crisis. They suddenly have a migraine, or they break down crying about how overwhelmed and unloved they feel. They force you to abandon your valid boundary to comfort them.
Yes.
They maintain dominance by being the ultimate untouchable victim. You can't be mad at a victim.
It's maddening. When I see this in my practice, the sheer exhaustion on these victims' faces is devastating. You're describing the sufferer archetype. And from a clinical trauma perspective, the reality of living with this day in, day out is absolute torture.
I'm sure it is.
The covert narcissist doesn't usually yell. They don't throw plates. They use indirect communication. It's the heavy sighs from the other room, the pointed, deafening silences, walking around the house looking like a wounded puppy. That's not depression. That's weaponized guilt. And it forces the victim to do all the emotional labor.
Emotional labor in what sense?
In the sense that the victim is forced to read between the lines. They have to play detective. The victim is constantly asking, "What did I do wrong? Are you mad at me?" when they haven't done anything at all.
Right.
The narcissist gets to sit back and watch their partner frantically try to regulate the environment. We see this constantly with weaponized incompetence, too. The narcissist will say, "I just can't handle doing the taxes. My anxiety is too severe," forcing the victim to take on the burden, while the narcissist gets to play the fragile soul who needs to be accommodated. It creates this suffocating fog of anticipatory dread.
But if we look closely at that dynamic, the heavy sighs and the incompetence, you are framing the indirect communication primarily as an emotional burden. I argue it's much darker than that. It is a highly calibrated punitive system.
Punitive?
Yes. Let's analyze the silent treatment, which is a hallmark of the covert narcissist. When the victim attempts to set a boundary or demands basic respect, the covert narcissist withdraws. They ice the victim out. Now, a trauma therapist might look at that and say, oh, they are emotionally flooded and lack the tools to communicate.
Which they often do claim, yes.
But I completely disagree. This is not a pause to cool down or regulate their own nervous system. It is calculated leverage. The not knowing is the punishment. They are deliberately starving the victim of baseline relational security. And if the victim finally confronts them about this cruelty, the covert narcissist flawlessly pivots to Darvo.
Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Precisely. Let's say the victim says, "It hurts when you ignore me for 3 days." The covert narcissist will deny, "I wasn't ignoring you, I was just tired." Then they attack, "You are always so needy and demanding of my time."
And then the reversal.
Right. Then they reverse victim and offender. "I have to walk on eggshells around you because nothing I do is ever good enough." In 3 sentences, the person who was ignored is now apologizing to the person who ignored them.
And that Darvo tactic is exactly why the psychological cage is the primary issue. When they deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender, they aren't just winning a domestic argument. They are actively creating epistemic injustice.
Wait, epistemic injustice? So you mean they aren't just calling the victim a liar? They're actually breaking the victim's internal compass so they no longer know what a truth or a lie even is?
On a profound structural scale.
Ooh.
Over time, the victim internalizes this and begins self-gaslighting. They literally doubt their own memories. They think, maybe I am too demanding. Maybe I did provoke them.
They assume the blame because it's the only way the puzzle pieces fit together in their mind.
Yes, and this is where the physiological trauma bond cements itself, which goes way beyond an emotional burden. I really want to explain exactly how this alters brain chemistry.
Go ahead.
The cycle of intermittent reinforcement, this cruel, icy withdrawal of the silent treatment, spikes the victim's cortisol levels. They are in a state of sheer panic, feeling entirely abandoned. Then, finally, the narcissist drops a tiny crumb of affection. They smile, or they act perfectly normal the next day.
And the victim is relieved.
The moment that happens, the victim's brain floods with dopamine. It is an intense biochemical relief. Over months and years, the victim's nervous system becomes literally addicted to the relief of the narcissist just being nice again. They are biologically tethered to the very person who is destroying their sanity, constantly chasing that initial high from the mirroring phase.
This is exactly what trips victims up, and it's where the dark empath's cognitive abilities reach their absolute peak of toxicity. Because they understand psychology, they don't just gaslight you using aggressive denial. They co-opt your reality using the very tools that designed to heal you.
That is so true.
In recent years, we're seeing a massive rise in the weaponization of therapy speak. A covert narcissist will use clinical terminology to completely evade accountability, and it is a brilliant, terrifying linguistic hack.
Oh, absolutely. They turn the language of healing into a bludgeon.
Think about the concept of boundaries. A true boundary is a limit on one's own behavior. It's me saying, if you yell at me, I need to step away from this conversation to protect my peace.
Right.
But a covert narcissist will turn a boundary into a rigid, controlling demand to isolate the victim. They'll say, "My boundary is that you cannot talk to your sister about our relationship because it violates my safe space." They've taken a fence designed for their own yard and turned it into a collar around the victim's neck.
Or how they use the term gaslighting itself.
Exactly. If the victim catches them in a lie and presents evidence, the dark empath doesn't just deny the lie, they accuse the victim of gaslighting them by bringing up the past or distorting their intentions.
It's projection.
It is. If the victim expresses genuine pain about something the narcissist did, the narcissist accuses them of trauma dumping and says they don't have the emotional bandwidth for it.
They use the vocabulary of mental health to enforce compliance, shut down the conversation, and completely invalidate the target.
I agree entirely with your analysis of the mechanics here, but we really have to look at the tragic irony of how this plays out socially. This therapy speak doesn't just work on the victim, it works on the community.
Yes, the outside perspective.
Because the dark empath uses all the right clinical buzzwords, and because they often appear agreeable, mild-mannered, and completely mentally healthy to the outside world, well, the victim's reality remains entirely invisible to outsiders.
The mask of the good citizen.
Right. And when the victim finally tries to escape or when they finally react to the abuse, the covert narcissist initiates a highly calculated smear campaign. But they don't do it with rage. They play the virtuous victim.
Oh, the absolute specialty of the communal or covert narcissist. They go to mutual friends and say, I tried so hard to help them, I really love them, but their mental health is just so toxic right now. I had to step away from my own peace.
It makes my stomach turn because it is so incredibly effective. The victim, who is already suffering from complex PTSD, chronic hypervigilance, and a shame-based identity from years of gaslighting, is now labeled the abuser, or the crazy one, by their own community.
Which just locks them further in the cage.
Exactly. The social isolation compounds the trauma exponentially. The fundamental clinical limitation we face in society is that we are trained to look for overt abuse. We look for the shouting, the thrown objects, the physical violence. We are completely unequipped to see the person who slowly, systematically drains their partner's life force while claiming to be the wounded party.
Because the predator looks calm.
Right. The victim looks unstable because they have been driven to the absolute edge of their sanity. Meanwhile, the predator looks calm, concerned, and perfectly regulated.
Which really brings us to the underlying tension of our discourse today. To synthesize my perspective, I think we must recognize covert narcissists for what they truly are. They are sophisticated psychological hackers. We just cannot afford to view them merely as damaged individuals doing their best with poor communication skills. They are, in many cases, dark empaths, operating with high cognitive empathy and zero affective empathy. By deeply understanding their calculated mechanics, how they use mirroring as data collection, how they deploy virtuous victim signaling for moral immunity, and how they utilize the pity play for empathetic dominance, we can recognize this hidden predation before it takes root. We have to strip away the illusion of their vulnerability to see the highly effective, punitive control system operating underneath.
And to bring my perspective into focus, while understanding their algorithmic tactics is intellectually valuable and certainly necessary, the true measure of this abuse is the fog it leaves behind. The psychological erosion of the victim's identity is the primary event.
I hear that.
If you are listening to this and your relationship is characterized by chronic guilt, relentless self-doubt, and the exhausting feeling of navigating a daily psychological minefield, your nervous system is not broken. It is functioning perfectly. It is accurately detecting a very real threat. You are not going crazy. You're being covertly dismantled. Protecting yourself doesn't just mean out-arguing their therapy speak. It means trusting your body's alarm system over their weaponized words.
We certainly emphasize different sides of the dynamic, the predator's calculated mechanics versus the victim's physiological and psychological erosion. Yet the clinical evidence we've discussed reveals a profoundly destructive behavioral loop. The predator's calculation explicitly relies on the victim's empathy to function.
There is so much more to explore in this material, especially regarding how to build protective boundaries that actually work against covert tactics and how a victim can begin to recover their internal compass from this specific type of complex trauma.
Indeed. We leave it to you, the listener, to reflect on your own relationships, your workplaces, and the environments you navigate daily. We aren't here to declare a winner of this debate, but rather to give you the lenses to see what is hidden in plain sight. Remember, the most dangerous predator doesn't always bare their teeth. Sometimes they just show you their wounds.